Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories with reaction to the shakeup at the Illinois Prisoner Review Board and an effort at the State House to get rid of Illinois' tipped wage law. I'll then join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss those stories and more. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop.
Do you know what elected officials in Illinois are doing with their tax dollars? Do you want to make sure that your voice is heard? If so, then you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch how your elected officials make decisions, hold them accountable for their actions, and be a more informed citizen. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to get involved in the democratic process and to make a difference in your community. Subscribe today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Here are some of the top stories from the past week. Some are looking to put more attention on the Illinois Prisoner Review Board after a recent parolee allegedly stabbed a pregnant woman and killed an 11-year-old boy. Following the resignation of two PRB members, Governor J.B. Pritzker said he's ensuring members get proper domestic violence training so something similar doesn't happen again. Monday, he couldn't say when he'll appoint replacements.
There have been people in the General Assembly, typically the opposite party, who have politicized this. So it makes it more difficult.
Republican State Senator Jason Plummer agreed politics needs to be removed, but he said Pritzker needs to bring better qualified candidates and stop manipulating the process by appointing and reappointing members after deadlines pass.
And that has left unqualified and dangerous people making reckless decisions for months and in some instances years at a time without being confirmed by the Senate.
Plummer says he supports efforts to bring more stringent requirements for appointees to the board and more adherence to the appointment and confirmation process. One of the most contentious pieces of legislation so far this spring in the Illinois General Assembly involves how members of the service industry are paid. Kevin Bessler has details.
A measure to eliminate the tip credit is getting a lot of attention in Springfield. State Representative Lisa Hernandez is the bill's sponsor.
Making the Illinois restaurant industry more competitive across the state and simplifying the Illinois minimum wage law by abolishing the sub-minimum wage.
Sam Toya, president of the Illinois Restaurant Association, says the current tipping system is working, as a median tip restaurant worker in Illinois currently earns over $28 per hour.
If this legislation becomes law, here's what we can expect. Layoff for servers, bartenders, bussers, and runners. Fewer hours for servers and higher costs at the table for the consumer.
The group Protect Illinois Restaurants reported a recent survey showed that 87% of tipped restaurant employees said the current tipping system works for them and should not be changed. Hernandez says she won't bring the bill for a final vote without addressing concerns. I'm Kevin Bessler.
Those are the top stories from the past week from Illinois. Find more online at thecentersquare.com. Coming up for Illinois in Focus, I'll join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss the news. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
Greetings and welcome to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. We are recording this on Thursday, April 4th. While an outbreak of measles that originated at a migrant shelter in Chicago has spread to some suburban communities, Illinois health officials are now closely monitoring some cases of tuberculosis that also originated at a migrant shelter for noncitizens in Chicago. Illinois' public health director just announced the tuberculosis outbreak Thursday. Joining me today to discuss this is Greg Bishop, the Center Square's Illinois Associate Editor. Greg, you covered the news from the Illinois Department of Public Health Director, Dr. Samir Vohra. What did he say?
Yeah, so today there was a House Public Health Committee that focuses on appropriations, and they were hearing about the Department of Public Health. And obviously they're going to be requesting tax dollars for operations in the next fiscal year. But whenever these department heads go to committees, you've got members of the committees that are asking all kinds of other questions as well, including news of the day. So the doctor, the director of the public health department for the state of Illinois, asked about not just the measles outbreak, but now on top of that, stories of cases of tuberculosis. So what's interesting here is Dr. Samir Vohra said that there are 56 cases of measles in Illinois as of Wednesday, saying that's the largest number per year that they've seen since data going back to 2010. Measles, obviously very serious, he said. And he also highlighted how the Illinois Department of Public Health has been working with local Chicago public health officials and Cook County public health officials. But you've got the spread not just from the migrant shelters in Chicago. For measles, it's now spreading to a couple of different counties outside of Chicago. So that is obviously top of mind for public health officials to make sure that they get this quarantined and individuals get measles vaccines. But then you put on top of that disease outbreak stories now of tuberculosis being found at migrant shelters. And Dr. Samir Vohra saying that they're keeping an eye on that as well, doing what they can to work at quarantining individuals and making sure that this does not spread either. And ultimately, he boiled it down saying that, he's told the officials this from the beginning, that infectious disease continues to be a challenge in the state of Illinois.
Listeners might not have heard the word tuberculosis in a while. Just briefly, what is tuberculosis?
Yeah, so it's an infectious bacterial disease that mainly affects the lungs. So it's different than measles, and I am by no means a doctor, but measles really it has effects all over the body, of course, but that's more outwardly seen with red rashes spreading across the body. But now that you've got measles outbreak, 56 cases, which when we first started seeing these numbers last month, it was 2, it was 4, it was 8. Now it's up to 56 cases. Right. Now, this week, we're hearing about tuberculosis in migrant shelters. So clearly there's a public health concern here. And the public health director for the state of Illinois says that they're doing what they can to stay on top of it.
Greg, here in the U.S., we have a comprehensive vaccination program, particularly when we're all much younger. I'm assuming these outbreaks have started in the migrant shelters because these folks maybe have come from countries that don't have quite a comprehensive vaccination program.
Yeah, that's correct. And I know that the governor, when he was asked about this by the Center Square at an unrelated event a couple of weeks ago when the measles cases were starting to be reported, the governor highlighted how a lot of the non-citizens arriving in Chicago have not had their measles vaccines. And even when they were offered the measles vaccines, the migrants were denying the measles vaccines. I think that sea has changed a bit, and they are getting more vaccines of measles into the arms of migrants. But clearly that's an ongoing issue that has people concerned about the public health outcomes of having non-citizens from countries that don't have robust vaccination campaigns at early ages for things like measles. I imagine we're going to see a lot more being said about this as we see these numbers possibly increasing.
Thank you for that information, Greg. As you mentioned earlier, the Illinois legislature is in session. New pieces of legislation, bills that have been filed, are working their way through the committee process. Greg, there's a new bill that would add another layer to the restrictions currently on gun owners. It would add another background check and mandatory gun training for gun owners. Tell us about this.
And this is interesting, especially when you look at FBI data of background checks for firearms. And the FBI tracks this and shows that Illinois is the most background checked state in the country. Data for all of 2023 from the FBI shows 4 million total firearm background checks in the country in Illinois. That's just 4 million just in Illinois now. That's the most in the country. That's first to Kentucky's second place spot at 3.6 million total checks. So Illinois, far and above, is the most background checked in the entire country as it is right now, according to FBI statistics for February or for all of 2023. What's fascinating here, though, is even with all those background checks, some legislators are looking to possibly put on even more background checks. Now, this measure is not advancing this week, with it being deadline week. House Bill 3239 from State Representative Maura Hirschauer, it would essentially tell Illinoisans who want to buy a firearm that they have to get 8 hours of training, and it would also require them to get permission from their local law enforcement department and to have to go through even more additional background checks. Now, people who have purchased guns in and out of Illinois know that when you go to a gun store, there's a background check. They are federally mandated to run a background check on you before you are able to take that firearm home. Now, in Illinois, you not only get a background check whenever you go to purchase that firearm, you also get a background check when you have to apply for the state-required firearm owner ID card, the FOID card. And part of that process, Dan, I don't think people realize this, and it may add to why Illinois is the most background checked state in the country, is the state police, Illinois State Police, they regularly run background checks on FOID card holders all throughout the year on somewhat of a revolving basis, from how I understand it. So that could be why we're the most background checked state. But this measure would essentially add on even more background checks for gun owners. And I've seen comments on our story that we published at centersquare.com about this possible bill advancing, and a lot of people questioning, if we're the most background checked state in the country, why is there so much gun violence in Chicago? Might be a bit of a hyperbolic, tongue-in-cheek question, but clearly there are some saying that these background checks are not working, and just stacking on more background checks may not do the trick. But this is also interesting because it comes as Illinois State Police are looking for $32 million of taxpayer money to continue operating the FOID card system. But Dan, the FOID card may not be around forever. It's currently being challenged in federal courts. There's a case that's coming together in the Southern District Federal Court that challenges the FOID card's constitutionality, and they go into the discovery phase in May for that case. So clearly this is an issue that we'll continue to watch, especially as taxpayer dollars are being used for this, and as Illinoisans are the most background checked in the entire country.
Yeah, the legal challenges aside, I would assume, just like there were a significant number of legal challenges both in state and federal court to the gun ban that Pritzker signed into law last year, and those are still ongoing in the court system. I would assume if this were to pass, this also would face legal challenges. But from a common sense standpoint, I just don't get it. What would as you mentioned, Illinois firearms owners are already getting 2 background checks at least. We don't know how many times they're getting additional background checks through the FOID system, but at least 2. What is a third background check going to find on legal gun owners that the previous 2 haven't?
That's a good question, and one that I think a lot of people are scratching their heads about. And it may be, maybe the initial background check with the FOID card, somebody got arrested on something else, and then, on a second subsequent background check, the arrests from between the first and the second checks, maybe that pops up. But either way, I don't know if the layers upon layers upon layers of background checks that are being conducted already on Illinoisans is preventing the type of violent crime that we see headlines out of places like Chicago on a regular basis.
Greg, in the wake of the news that we reported last week at the centersquare.com on a former inmate who was paroled early by the Illinois Prisoner Review Board, the next day after he was released from prison, went out and is accused of stabbing his former girlfriend and 11-year-old boy, killing the 11-year-old boy. Republicans are now calling for reforms on the Illinois Prisoner Review Board. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is something that Republicans have been calling for even before the stabbing death of an 11-year-old boy and the stabbing of a pregnant woman who survived, but obviously has to deal with the trauma of what happened here. This is the case of Crossetti Brand, serving time in prison, asks for parole, goes to the Illinois Prisoner Review Board, and a PRB member that's appointed by Governor J.B. Pritzker ultimately heard that case and decided to move forward with letting Brand out of prison. But this came despite the Department of Corrections and other law enforcement agencies being aware of Brand harassing his victims, which should have been enough to revoke that, but that's not what happened. So as we reported at thecentersquare.com, you had one parole board member, Leanne Miller, step down, and the governor announcing that. And then later on in the same day, the chairman of the Prisoner Review Board stepped down. Governor J.B. Pritzker on Monday, his first public appearance since this tragic story, he said that there are changes that are necessary, that are evident in this, saying that there needs to be more domestic violence training with the Prisoner Review Board members so that they're keenly aware of all the different things they need to know when reviewing these types of cases. But Republicans say that's not enough. Republicans have been pointing to the problems with the Prisoner Review Board for literally years now. And it's not just the quality of the Prisoner Review Board members they say is not up to snuff. It's also the process the governor's gone about appointing Prisoner Review Board members. In particular, you've got the process of appointing, which whenever the governor makes an appointment to, either a state agency or the Prisoner Review Board, the Senate, which confirms appointments, has 60 days to act on that appointment. If they don't act within that 60 days, then that appointment expires and that individual is no longer in that position. But what happened for years, and this being blamed on COVID, the governor would appoint somebody to the PRB, the Senate wouldn't act on it for 60 session days, and then the governor would withdraw the name of that individual, but then reappoint that individual, resetting that 60-day clock. Republicans say that that is a manipulation of the system. So all of that aside, Republicans say that they want more qualifications for PRB members. So they're going to try to pass legislation that would bring about those types of qualifications, ensuring that people who are on the Prisoner Review Board have a certain amount of years of experience dealing with criminal justice issues, making sure that they have regular training when it comes to domestic violence issues, and a whole host of other things. And there's also legislation that's being filed by Senate Republicans to enhance penalties for people who violate domestic orders of protection, as this particular case seems to highlight. So a lot more is going to be said about the Prisoner Review Board, especially as the governor, he says that appointing people to the Prisoner Review Board is more difficult because he says Republicans are making politics out of this. But Republican leadership in the Senate says that's ridiculous. This is not political. This is about life and death and public safety.
Public safety, right? So, one final thought on this, Greg. In introducing the reform measures that the Republicans want, State Senator Jason Plummer, a Republican from Edwardsville, noted that the Prisoner Review Board under Governor Pritzker is more than twice as likely to release someone from prison than previous prisoner review boards. So it's evident that this current Prisoner Review Board has a softer stance on crime than at least Republicans would prefer.
Yeah, and again, you're going to hear a lot more about this in the remaining weeks of session as they march towards that May 31st deadline. And clearly the budget's going to be top of mind, but changes at the Prisoner Review Board could very well take some headlines as well.
Moving on, Greg, also in the legislature, there is a bill that would end the sub-minimum wage for tipped workers, and bring tipped workers, restaurant workers, etc., those who receive tips, up to the regular minimum wage. And there's a lot of opposition to that. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so last year was one of the first rallies on this issue where they brought down some union members from Chicago to the Capitol, and they held a rally about one fair wage with union support, saying that the servers who work at restaurants that make sub-minimum wage a tipped wage, and their employers who get a tipped wage credit, they say that needs to end and that everybody should make at least minimum wage. So they put together this bill, and this year they're trying to advance it. And actually, Dan, yesterday on Wednesday, after a more than 4-hour-long committee hearing, they did advance the bill. It was the last bill they debated. They had to count the votes to make sure they had people either in the committee or replace people in the committee to get votes in line, because there's bipartisan opposition to this. You've got Republicans and Democrats that say this is not the right way to go. Of course, with the proponents of this, they say that everybody should make a minimum wage. But the opponents of this say that that's misleading, because everybody who works at a restaurant already makes at least minimum wage. Say a server goes out and it's a slow night and they don't have a lot of tables. They don't make a lot of tips. The employer is supposed to make up the difference between that sub-minimum wage and minimum wage so that they make at least minimum wage. But surveys indicate that most servers make well and above the minimum wage when they get tips. So the supporters, they also say that part of the bill they're advancing has other measures about holding bad actors more accountable, but opponents to the bill say, why not just take that element out? Why not take the element out that says the state has more authority to go after and more power to go after bad actors that aren't paying the workers what they by law should be paid? Instead, the opponents of this essentially indicating that it's a radical idea to come in and upend this entire system of merit-based tipping service staff at restaurants. So clearly this is an effort that is advancing. It moved out of committee, but the sponsor of this measure said that they are not going to call it for a final vote, so they can try to get more people on board. So it's not the last we've heard of this issue. Clearly, it's going to be raised again before they say goodbye for spring session.
Greg, one interesting tidbit from the Center Square's Kevin Bessler, who reported on this bill at thecentersquare.com. He reported that the medium tipped restaurant worker wage, so those making the sub-minimum wage, but with tips added onto it, currently earns over $28 an hour. So they are, according to this data point, they are earning more than significantly more than the minimum wage. Greg, we're going to leave government news for our final segment here. There's an event happening, particularly in southern Illinois. It's going to be quite the phenomenon. Tell us about it.
It is a solar eclipse, and it is going to be a 4-minute solar eclipse where if you're in the path of totality, it's going to be complete darkness for 4 minutes. So Monday, close to around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, on stretches of southern Illinois, you're going to have quite the show. And there is a lot of people traveling to this area. If you haven't already made plans, you're likely going to be stuck in traffic. They're even closing schools so that kids in the path of totality can enjoy this. But please do not look straight up without any filter or any kind of thing that blocks the sun from your eyes, because there are optometrists and eye doctors out there warning that in 2017 they saw more eye damage from the 2017 eclipse that came through Illinois than they had previously seen. So the warnings are out. Don't look straight at this. Use either approved glasses that are real dark and you can't see anything other than the sunlight through those glasses, or just use some kind of colander, or you can look up on NASA's website about how to make a cardboard box viewing device so that you can see the eclipse. But this is really going to be quite the show that a lot of people are traveling to southern Illinois and camping out and going to Carbondale, and they're gonna have a good time watching this from afar.
Thanks for the public service announcement and the safety tips. I'm looking forward to Monday, Greg. But we are out of time. Thank you for joining us. Listeners can keep up with all of the stories we talked about and more at thecentersquare.com.